today's proceedings to the chair, I'll just read out the customary house rules. I request all the speakers and the panelists to mute themselves when not speaking. The questions will be taken during the discussion and the Q&A session. Panelists can ask questions to the speakers live through the raise hand options. Questions can also be asked by the registered attendees live by typing through chat box. This will be visible to all the panelists. Questions should be kept brief and should be addressed to the panelists to whom it is asked. In case you are facing some connectivity issues, you may switch off the camera and continue on audio mode. With this, I request our chair, Ambassador Preeti Saran, to kindly give her opening remarks and conduct the proceedings. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Ao. Good morning and namaste to all the participants, especially to the very eminent panelists who are here with us this morning. I'm really delighted to chair this session on people-to-people contacts within the framework of Mekong Ganga cooperation, especially at a time when we celebrate 20 years of the establishment of this sub-regional grouping. I see the presence of Dr. T.C. Raghavan here, DG ICWA, and would like to thank him and Prabir Dey of ASEAN India Center as well as RIS for organizing this seminar to mark the 20 years of the establishment of the Mekong Ganga cooperation. It is a pity that we have to celebrate this landmark year in this virtual format instead of attending in person, because online discussion just cannot replace the importance of personal human contacts, especially when our topic in this session happens to be promoting greater understanding amongst our people through people-to-people contacts. Certainly seminars like this one, even in the virtual format, I think are one of the most important elements of people-to-people contacts that help in forging closer relations amongst our scholars, our academics, our think tanks and institutions in influencing public opinion and in enhancing greater personal understanding. As pointed out in the previous sessions, and I've been hearing some of the discussions, the Mekong Ganga cooperation is perhaps one of the oldest, most diverse, varied and multidimensional frameworks of sub-regional cooperation for India. There is a people-to-people dimension to each of the sectors of cooperation. The Mekong Ganga cooperation has received a major boost since the articulation of India's Act East policy in 2014. And during my days as Secretary East, I had the pleasure of being very much part of some of these processes. And I have to admit that all the meetings that we held in the context of Mekong Ganga cooperation perhaps were the most exciting, most fruitful, and with a great sense of fulfillment. Activities, programs and projects have been scaled up, elevating intergovernmental discussions to ministerial level that now meets regularly on the margins of the ASEAN-related meetings. This itself highlights the importance that our governments attach to this sub-regional grouping. However, given the importance and tangible and intangible benefits of human interaction amongst the citizens of our region, I think people-to-people contacts cannot be just relegated to or left to just the intergovernmental processes alone. The Mekong Ganga cooperation is named after two great civilizational rivers with a common ecosystem. In the previous session, I heard Dr. Nguyen Hue Huong share the immense challenges faced by the Mekong River Basin due to illegal activities undertaken by China that has huge adverse environmental and economic impact on the entire region. We share the same concerns and we face similar challenges in the Brahmaputra and the Indo-Gangetic River Basin. Frequent interaction and experience sharing amongst us can become important components of finding coordinated solutions to similar challenges, and the importance of people-to-people contacts cannot be underestimated in this context. India's relations with the Mekong region are based on a shared heritage that represent common values, converging interests, and an immense potential for future cooperation in diverse sectors including trade and investment, economic development, tourism, education, and culture. The commonality of our performing arts, including folk dance, music, the performance of Ramayana in the entire region, the popularity of Indian cinema, of television programs and other forms of popular art and culture, and crafts of Buddhism, of yoga, of Ayurveda, and other systems of traditional medicines and cuisine are other important components of human interaction that merits in-depth discussion in this session on people-to-people contacts as well. Equally important are the ethnic and cultural linkages amongst our people, particularly from the northeastern parts of India and the Mekong region. In spite of the commonalities, however, there are several impediments that have come in the way of promoting greater people-to-people contacts amongst us. I think the foremost being lack of information about each other, poor communication, and absence of infrastructure that impedes freer movement of people and goods. Tourism, that has been the mainstay of facilitating people-to-people contacts in recent years, has received a major setback in the wake of the COVID pandemic. It will perhaps be the last sector to recover from this jolt. In this session, I look forward to our panelists addressing some of these issues, which will also impact on the economic and cultural relations between India and the Mekong region. I'm aware that our very eminent panelists have written papers that would be compiled in a publication following this seminar. And as pointed out earlier in the opening remarks of Dr. Ao, I request if the panelists could kindly therefore restrict their presentation today to 15 minutes so that we are left with some more time for questions at the end of the presentations. As you heard, there is a chat box for all participants to post their questions, and look forward to receiving questions from the other participants to the seminar in this session. I now request Dr. Chheang Vannarith, President of the Asian Vision Institute, Phnom Penh, to kindly make his presentation. Over to you, Dr. Vannarith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, the organizer, for the opportunity, and would like to extend my warm congratulations to the previous panelists. Here I frame my paper as following. First, I discussed India people diplomacy. So people diplomacy can be, defined similarly to the public diplomacy. So here in this paper, I define it as a government-led or government-sponsored activity or programs with the aim to promote cross-boundary communication and interaction between people in order to achieve foreign policy interests and objectives. So this is quite official or formal definition of people diplomacy. So it must be driven and supported by the state as a key actor. So people diplomacy here is to build, the objectives to build a long-lasting relationship of trust. So the key word here is a trust-based relationship between the people. And to build also a network of institutions and individuals that can shape the public opinion, especially to shape the positive public opinion of the country that carrying out this people diplomacy. And the PD, the people diplomacy, is one of the key pillars in the Mekong Ganga cooperation. And I need to mention also that India, according to some of my readings since 2006, have created this division called the Public Policy Division within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Of course, there are some results and limitations, shortcomings in this, the public diplomacy or people diplomacy being carried out by India. Within the framework of Mekong Ganga, we could see that it is the cultural cooperation, human resources development, exchanges, and tourism are the three pillars of the people diplomacy. Can refer to some of the action plan 2019 to 2022 and other kind of policy statements within the framework of Mekong Ganga cooperations. So I would like to highlight 3 pillars under the people diplomacy. Here is human resource development, cultural cooperation, and cultural tourism cooperation. Our previous panelists mentioned about the Cambodia Indian entrepreneurship center, but it's been changed the name to the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation under the Ministry of Labor and Vocational Training. It had contributed quite significantly to capacity building on human resource development, on entrepreneurship. So that is one of the example of the human resource development program. So the government of India had provided hundreds of scholarship to the students from the Mekong countries. They ranging of area of study from ITC to cultural preservation and so on. Another cooperation is under the framework of the Mekong, the Museum of Traditional Art, Asian Textile and Siem Reap, Cambodia. So that also create this kind of people-to-people and human resource development. So those who've been study at the universities in India under the cooperation framework, they have some either internship or working opportunities at the Museum of the Textile in Siem Reap, Cambodia. English training program, quite significant also. India have created several centers of English language training across the Mekong region. Cambodia 2007, Laos, Myanmar 2009, and Vietnam also 2009. So relating to the cultural cooperations, we could see the flow of this kind of cultural exchanges together with the people human resources have been quite significant over the past years. So at the 10th Mekong Ganga Cooperation Ministry meeting in August last year, the minister highlighted the importance of the field of culture and people-to-people contacts, and they agreed to promote or host the artisans or cultural troops from the Mekong country to India, so kind of cultural fairs and festivals. And they also welcome the MOC country the decision to develop a joint calendar of important travel fairs and cultural festivals. So this is kind of important cultural activities that can further strengthen the mutual understanding between the two people. With regards to some of the other initiatives, the textile that I mentioned earlier is also one of the key area of cultural cooperations, and this is the remarks of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India, as he said at the opening of the textile, that this deep cultural empathy within this region. So I think the word cultural empathy is a key word there that really draw public attention to the significance of India Mekong cultural ties. So the MGC countries moving forward need to have a common pathway in order to further strengthen the cultural cooperations. So the member countries should undertake a bottom-up approach, which involves a real stakeholder in designing the cultural integration programs among the countries of the Mekong Ganga. And here, the Nalanda University, which was founded some times ago, to revive and connect Asian civilization, can play a bridging role in this regard. It's the key stakeholders in connecting the cultural or civilizations across the regions. So, to echo what our Madam Chair mentioned earlier, that we still have a lack of information sharing. So that's why the member country have this agreement on setting up a number of Indian study center across the Mekong, and vice versa, to create a Mekong study center in India. So this is kind of a political commitment, but in terms of implementation, is still not yet in creating India Study Center across the Mekong countries in order to promote the information flow. So the third pillar of people diplomacy is cultural tourism cooperations. So India has has organized Buddhist pilgrims pilgrimage for the Mekong countries. For instance, 2007. India hosted a delegation of about 100 Buddhist pilgrims. And also there's some proposal to create Buddhist trail within the framework of MTC in order to further strengthen the civilization or connectivity between India and the Mekong country. And of course, there's some also proposal on connecting the flights between India and the Mekong to connect some of the key tourist spots between India and the Mekong country. And Siem Reap Angkor is one of the key kind of connecting points in this heritage trail tourism within the framework of MTC. They also have this proposal to create institutional contact between the National Tourism Management Institute and agencies. So that is another program or human resource development program that have to promote the tourism cooperation between the countries. The shortcomings and challenges of the India before diplomacy, as we all know, is first is the lack of resources and concrete action. So across Mekong country and across Southeast Asia in general, we keep hearing a complaint, criticism of India foreign policy or engagement in this region is the lack of resources and capacities. Let's say, talking about the Mekong Ganga Corporation, we don't have a kind of a website dedicated to this mechanism, or a secretariat or coordinating body to work on promoting this body yet. It's not a big investment, if you create a website of Mekong Ganga Corporation with all the full detailed information activity, it would be very helpful to promote mutual understanding. You can learn from the Langchang Mekong Corporation or US Mekong Partnership or Japan Mekong or Korean Mekong, that they have a lot of information available online, activities available online that you can learn what's going on there. So, if we have great ideas, great proposals, vision, but if you don't have money and human resources, then you can have a problem of trust. That is the thing that I could receive a widespread perception across the region, that India talk so much but do little. They tend to compare with China, with talk little but do so much. So that is the kind of perception, public perception across the region. So I think that the lack of resources and concrete action from the Indian side create this kind of a vacuum or a loophole in the engagement strategy. So another example is the credit line of $1 billion that India has promised, but no one or no activity have been, no one can get the money yet. So India have been talking about 1 billion credit line for the past few years, but due to bureaucracy or I don't know, no country or no entity have been able to get the money from this 1 billion credit line. So again, it may lead to the distrust at the policy making level between India and the Mekong and India and ASEAN to a large extent. Another kind of the spillover effect of people diplomacy and public perception toward China is the last minute withdrawal from the Regional Comprehensive Partnership. So I've been talking to some eminent persons that have involved in the RCEP negotiation that they were shocked to hear that Prime Minister Modi decided to withdraw India from the RCEP. And for your information, RCEP will be concluded in November. This update, today, this morning, I received the update from colleague from Ministry of Foreign Affairs Cambodia. So that they proceed smoothly with the conclusion of Regional Comprehensive Partnership. So this is something the spillover effect on the people diplomacy, especially from track 2 diplomacy and how they perceive India engagement. So the piece written by ICS at Singapore, as you know, she's been working for ASEAN for many years, and now she works as researcher at ICS. So she wrote an op-ed on DX policy, and he used the word acting, not really act. So that kind of reflects the overall sentiment of track 2 academic think tanks across Southeast Asia when it comes to the India engagement in the Mekong and ASEAN. So those are the key shortcomings, lack of resources in concrete action, and the spillover effect of the Indian withdrawal on the overall perception, public perception across the regions. So to conclude my presentation, we acknowledge the importance of India, a role in this region, and the people diplomacy that India have been implemented have gained certain momentum with some concrete results on the ground, especially cultural cooperation and human resource development. But India need to deliver more, need to commit more to deliver concrete results, especially on the information sharing and delivering realizing the materializing of the proposal that India had proposed, especially in the action plan 2029-2022. So those are some of the key areas perhaps the India and the Mekong country can work together to materialize what they already pledged to do. Another proposal for this moving forward is to develop a cultural corridor that just integrate or harmonize what we have now, the existing mechanism, existing program that we have, to integrate together and put it into a cultural corridor. And here I would like to state the policy recommendation conducted by the OSI, the organizer of this event, that they suggested several policy recommendations which can be included or integrated in the cultural corridor development between the Mekong Ganga countries, and among which is to conduct joint research project on civilizational ties. So that is the area that perhaps we can focus on. So another is my personal recommendation, because I'm learning from the VASS, following the VASS closely, and very, very attractive and impactful on the public perception of the youth. So it's small investment from the United States, but the impact is very significant. So perhaps India can follow the footsteps of the US in creating a Mekong Ganga Young Leaders Program in order to engage the future generation of the people of the two countries. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chheang Vannarith. It's really a very candid presentation. I think you made some very important, very useful points, particularly in building people-to-people contacts on a trust-based relationship. I think the 3 pillars were very important components. I think you were very frank in sharing your frustration where India is falling short in terms of its cooperation and, human resource development, or, promising too much, talking too much, doing little, acting rather than actually implementing some of the programs that have been announced. I completely agree that there are frustrations, as a bureaucrat who has handled some of these aspects from at an intergovernmental level. I can tell you that, you mentioned this bit about $1 billion that was announced by the government of India at one of the ASEAN summits. I think, was it 2015 or 16? I have to share, of course, there are impediments and shortcomings on our side, but the frustration we face are equally on the other side as well. For example, within the ASEAN framework, there is a huge bureaucracy where all the 10 countries must approve a project before it's actually implemented, say, in one particular country. And for them to actually agree to, even be announced a pilot project, for example, for digital connectivity, it took us 1 year to go back and forth with the Secretariat. And then finally, we announced on our own that we'd rather do it bilaterally with a certain country rather than use the framework of the ASEAN model, because there were impediments in getting approvals also from the recipient countries. So that was the frustration that Government of India faces in dealing with these. I think some pilot projects have started in terms of digital connectivity, of building, digital connections within model villages, etc. I think there have been some successes. You mentioned about the Textiles Museum and some other, the Entrepreneur Development Center or the English Language Speaking Center. But yes, there are capacity constraints that India has. India itself is a developing country. But in terms of South-South cooperation, and this is, India extends this kind of cooperation not just to the Mekong region, but to large parts of Africa and other parts of Asia as well. I think where India has succeeded is in, capacity building programs, The other is where we've shared very happily without, containing our knowledge just to ourselves. On the physical infrastructure, clearly there have been, we talked about the Trilateral Highway. Again, there are frustrations where, getting approvals. I'm surprised that, other major mega infrastructure projects from some of your other development partners somehow get speeded up much faster than projects that are on offer from the Indian side. That said, there are great lessons to be learned. I think more interaction amongst our academics, our scholars, our think tanks on the track to will certainly sensitize the government on how to do it. But yes, when it comes to people-to-people contacts, it has to move beyond just what's happening at the intergovernmental level. And I think some of the other suggestions you made about the website, I think that's a low-cost thing. Certainly, it can be done, or the youth leaders program. I think again a very important one. I think some beginnings were made. A couple of youth summits were held. I knew that Shristi is sitting here. She was very much involved with the first India-ASEAN Youth Summit that was held in Bhopal. And but those are really small steps. I think really given the very close historical, cultural connection, I think there is much more that should be done. You talked about trust deficit. Yes, there is that aspect to be considered. But I think there's also a great deal of goodwill. When I was personally directly dealing, what I found was that you mentioned about the trust deficit that India promises and doesn't deliver. But on the other hand, the sense I got was that India was very welcome in a very different way, because India did not threaten. India did not make programs that got you into debt traps, but India was in a way a more welcoming, a more benign presence. And I think at the academic level, I think those are the ones we should be really building upon, on the positive aspects of the relationship. But yes, I think you've made some very important, pertinent points. RCEP, I think maybe it was dealt with in the economic and the trade sections. Perhaps I missed it, but yeah, RCEP perhaps did create a bit of a, you call it a trust deficit, but and you said it took some of the countries in the RCEP by surprise. As an Indian, I can tell you that what took us by surprise was that how there was complete insensitivity shown to India's concerns. We have had major trade deficit issues with many of the ASEAN countries, and the ASEAN FTA needs to be addressed directly even before we enlarge to the RCEP concept. There were strengths that we have, a positive interest in certain sectors. Those were not addressed. So obviously, when our concerns were not addressed, we had to move out of RCEP. But that said, I will never say never. There might be a time when there could. But I think it's important when we do these processes, I think the sensitivities of both sides have to be taken into consideration. And that is another thing, I think, where scholars need to highlight that aspect as well. But I will now request Dr. Xuan Vinh to kindly make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you hear me? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Ambassador Preeti Saran. I'd like to express my thanks to ICWA and RIS for inviting me to speak at this conference. My paper is on the people-to-people contact aspect in Mekong Ganga cooperation. The paper includes 5 parts. The part 1 is on the people-to-people contact in MGG countries. The second and the third are on the tourism and education cooperation in MGC. The third is some shortcomings of the cooperation in those fields. And the last one is some conclusions. The first, as an element of public diplomacy, as I also share the view from Dr. Chheang Vannarith, that people-to-people diplomacy, or even the people diplomacy in a short form, has played an important role in foreign policy of many countries, including India and Mekong countries. For contemporary India, people diplomacy appeared for the first time, as I learned, in the annual report of 1977-1978 of the Ministry of External Affairs Government of India. The document writes that in the belief that further contacts between the peoples of India and Pakistan can lead to the building of trust and understandings. Since then, especially after the Cold War, the people diplomacy has become an important component of India's foreign policy. To enhance cultural, educational, and academic fields with ASEAN countries, India has advocated promoting people-to-people contacts, religious tourism, linkages among institutions of higher learning, and mass media cooperation on issues of common interest, and to take forward the vision of deepening regional integration with ASEAN countries. Myanmar has essentially adopted a people-centered policy, emphasizing the relations between peoples of nations, creating friendly and cooperative relations between them. Thailand has actively encouraged people-to-people contacts with foreign countries, supported people diplomacy to safeguard the interests of Thai national as well as protect Thai national and Thai workers abroad. In Vietnam foreign policy, the people-to-people diplomacy has become an important factor in boosting cooperation and trust among countries and nations, helping make relationships deeper, stable, and sustainable. In the case of Cambodia, as I learned, instead of using the terms people diplomacy or public diplomacy, it has explored cultural diplomacy, in which people-to-people diplomacy partly performs. Cambodian government has invested more efforts and resources to advance its cultural diplomacy, as assuming more a leadership role of cultural diplomacy in promoting international cultural exchanges. In the case of Laos, PDR, It is difficult to see any terms and official statement on people-to-people contact or public diplomacy or cultural diplomacy. Instead, government has made use of benefits from people-to-people exchanges to develop this country. The second part of the paper is the tourism cooperation and of the countries in MGC. Tourism cooperation is one of 4 areas that India and Mekong countries agreed to cooperate since the first ministerial meeting in 2000. Up to now, tourism cooperation has always been a key field of cooperation in MGC. Among 11 cooperation areas of plan of action for 2019-2023, tourism cooperation is listed at second, after cultural cooperation. This shows the importance of tourism cooperation in MGC in recent years. In recent years, although MGC has not really created a specific mechanism to promote tourism cooperation, this field of cooperation between the Mekong countries and India has made significant progress. The first is cooperation in connectivity. The most interesting progress in connectivity is the launching of direct flights from major cities of India to major cities of Vietnam and Myanmar. In addition, the application of visa on arrival between India and Mekong countries has created a great boost for tourism cooperation between them. Another factor that cannot be ignored is that the per capita income of the MGC country has gained a remarkable development. As a result, there has been a significant increase of number of tourists from India to these countries and vice versa. The number of tourists from Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam to visit India has increased notably. The number of tourists from Myanmar from 2011 to 2018, one tourist to India increased by 67% from 2011 to 2018. But from Southeast Asian country increased by 70%. From Thailand increased by 80%. From Myanmar increased by more than 200%. And the high rate from Vietnam increased more than 220% in 7 years. On the other side, Indian tourists from Mekong countries also have a significant increase in the last decade. Number of Indian tourists to Mekong country gained a breakthrough, doubling from nearly 1 million in 2011 to nearly 2 million in 2018. Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia have witnessed a fastest growth of number of Indian tourist arrivals. The increase of Indian tourists to the Mekong country is much higher, 100%, than those from ASEAN in average. It is around 72%, and from international tourists to ASEAN it's around 44% in the periods of 2011 to 2018. The third most noteworthy point in tourism cooperation between India and Mekong country is in the support in enhancing human resources for tourism in Mekong country. As well, like ITEX scholarship, India has provided country, including those from Mekong region, with a lot of communication skill in English and tourism and hospitality management. Courses at National Institute for Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. Also, and the third, we come to the cooperation in education. Cooperation in education between India and Mekong country is also an important channel in people-to-people diplomacy between them. This cooperation activity has been actively promoted thanks to the proactive support from India, and so share the viewpoints from Dr. Vannarith Chheang from CICP Cambodia. Cooperation in education is one of 4 areas of cooperation since the inception of MGC from 2000. Not long after the MGC establishment, India granted the MGC scholarship scheme for the Mekong countries. Especially, India grant 50 scholarship to Mekong country in the MGC annually. The scholarships are granted for courses for the undergraduate, postgraduate, master degree, and PhD as well. Besides MGC scholarship scheme, India has been providing Mekong country with various kinds of scholarship schemes, such as ITEC, Technical Cooperation Scheme, or TCS, or the General Cultural Scholarship Scheme, or GCSS, ICWA ARC Scholarship Scheme, EU Scholarship for Southeast Asian region, No in the program, and scholarship program for diaspora children as well. The support from India, from my personal viewpoint, has contributed significantly to capacity buildings and human resource development in Mekong countries. And now we come to some shortcomings in terms of education and tourism cooperation between India and Mekong country. There are still barriers posing on the tourism and education cooperation between India and Mekong countries. According to the Indian tourism statistic, most of Southeast Asian tourists arrive in India by air. However, there are no direct flights between India and Cambodia and between India and Laos and vice versa. Direct flight between India and Vietnam was launched since last year, and the direct flight between India and Myanmar has also begin recently. One of the reasons that number of tourists from Cambodia and Laos have not been listed in India tourism statistics because there's still no direct flight from India to those countries and vice versa. Especially, there are increasing number of cheap airways participating in passenger transportation between India and Mekong countries as well recently. In terms of cooperation in education, although the number of scholarships India has offered to Mekong country is huge, however, the problem is that the utilization of them is still limited. Indicators show that if the utilization rate of India scholarship tend to increase positively from 52% from fiscal year 2009-2010 to 61% in fiscal year 2013-2014 and nearly 70% in fiscal year 2016-17 respectively. The utilization of the MGC scholarship scheme is really low, still now less than 45%. This may partly explain in the limited English proficiency of those who are interested in the scholarship that Indian government has offered. But in the context of generous scholarship granted by the US, European country, Australia, Japan, and China, the less generous scholarship offered by India, coupled with the difficult weather in this country, are also challenges for candidates who choose India as a destination for their study. And now I come to some conclusion. Thanks to India's look it and act it policy and the involving architecture in Southeast Asia region, especially the emerging strategic importance of Mekong region, the relations between India and Mekong country have gained achievements. From 4 or even 5 years for a military meeting to be commenced since 2016, the MGC military meeting had been held annually. The fields of cooperation have also expanded from 4 traditional fields of cooperation to since 2000, and now to 11 cooperation priority in 2020. Cooperation between India and Mekong country in fields of tourism and education have been promoted mostly thanks to the increasing commitment of India to the region. However, the limitations in terms of connectivity between India and the country in MGC and the variety of scholarship schemes granted by major powers such as the United States, European country, India, Japan, Australia, and pose challenges of the utilization of India scholarship for MGC in particular. It is useful if there is an official MGC website and society viewpoint from Dr. Vannarith to publicize the information of the mechanism instead of increasing the number of scholarships from my personal viewpoint, it is good to think about the value of the scholarship. That is very important. Last but not least, it is time to think of upgrading the MGC from military meeting to summit meeting, like Japan and Mekong countries have been doing. That is all of my presentation. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Xuan Vinh. I think really, again, a very detailed and a very frank presentation on people diplomacy, public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, whatever you'd like to say. I think your detailed expose of what each of the Mekong countries are doing in this aspect of people diplomacy, I think is a very important takeaway for me listening to you. I think your suggestions of specific mechanisms, some of the positive developments, whether it's visa on arrival, etc., I think are very important developments. Tourism, of course, remains unfortunately very badly impacted this year. Indians were perhaps the second largest tourists for the entire Mekong region, before the COVID impacted adversely. And, where Indian tourists go, they don't just go, they are great spenders, so they actually contribute to boosting the local economy because they are huge shoppers. Then, they really are in that way very welcome tourists, unlike, backpackers and others who look like many in plenty, but they really don't, spend money, whereas Indians are great spenders. You did point out to the important, the major shortcomings. Direct flights remains one. I have to share with you at a personal level of my own experience. When I was in Vietnam, we tried very hard to push the airlines, Vietnam Airlines, Air India, Jet Airways, and others, to start these direct flights. And I'll tell you, the mindset was like a chicken and egg situation. They said, we must have the traffic before we start the direct flight, was the airlines, and our perception was that, unless you don't start the flights, the traffic will not build. So, the airlines are waiting for the traffic to build up, and it's the other way around, that people are waiting really for the flights to start before the traffic builds up. So it remains a vicious circle. Again, I think the COVID pandemic has adversely impacted on the few baby steps that were started, with Vietnam. Cambodia, again, Siem Reap remains such an important destination for Indian tourists, but, they go to Bangkok. And from there, they'll go to Siem Reap. But, there were direct flights, actually, as a direct flight from New Delhi or Bombay to Ho Chi Minh or Hanoi is just 5 hours, but actually it takes almost 24 hours to get there, which is so unfortunate. We hope that as things improve and the tourism sector begins to open up and the civil aviation and the airline sector opens up and recovers from this huge impact, perhaps there will be better arrangement. Certainly on the scholarship front, I think Dr. Chheang Vannarith also mentioned the fact that in comparison to other development partners that the Mekong region has, perhaps India is not doing enough. You mentioned about more generous scholarships. We have to keep in mind that, of course, we have our own constraints, and unlike, say, Japan or USA, we are still ourselves a developing country. But within those constraints, we do try to do our best. But I think that's, again, a very important takeaway and a very good feedback, I think, for this forum to present to the government. And then perhaps it's best to, when you talk about utilization, if it's only 45% utilization of the MGC, better than to, utilize it 100% and put all the resources into, making the stipend more generous, so that even if it's fewer who get covered, but they get covered more appropriately than, trying to spread the resources too thin amongst too many. But I know that one of the reasons for not having a better implementation of the scholarship program has been the lack of language. I think English language, especially for the short-term scholarship schemes, the ITEC, etc., unless there is a skill in English language learning or any of the other Indian languages, I think it would be pointless to have students come in from the region and not understand a word within 6 months. How much can they possibly learn if they don't have the basic language skills? So that was one of the impediments we faced, and that's why the English language centers were there. But of course, that's not the solution. But I think these are all steps that we keep doing. I think greater interaction, greater feedback from all of you helps in building a critical mass of public opinion through this forum. So thank you for those very useful suggestions.
Yeah, thank you.
I will now request Dr. Shristi Pukhrem to kindly make her presentation. Thank you.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you, Preeti ma'am, for this opportunity. I thank ICWA and ASEAN India Center RIS for this, platform and bringing in the scholars of both Mekong and India together on a common platform. It's indeed a great experience. And we have seen that in the last one day, now going through the second half of it, we have seen immense discussion on various topics regarding Mekong Ganga cooperation. Today, I would like to speak on Mekong Ganga cooperation, mainly focusing on people-to-people linkages. So much has been spoken about when we are talking about Mekong Ganga cooperation by my previous panelists too. So as everyone is aware that it's an initiative of India along with the Mekong countries with Cambodia, Laos PDR, Myanmar, Thailand and Vietnam. So Mekong Ganga cooperation was first launched in Vientiane with the objective of cooperation on tourism, culture, education, as well as transport and communications. So both Ganga and Mekong, as we are all aware, they are important rivers. And with the advent of this project, it aims to better the long-standing civilizational linkages between the people residing at these two major river basins. So this region is very important for India's Act East policy, as this project will not only strengthen the ties between these countries, but will also ensure seamless economic integration into the region. This project also aims at narrowing the development gap through digital connectivity and capacity building. So building and strengthening people-to-people linkages and cooperation is one of the key aspects of Mekong Ganga cooperation. India and the Mekong countries, they share strong cultural and civilizational ties, which lays the foundation in further exploring the scope of cooperation. In fact, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, he rightly said that the Mekong Ganga cooperation, it turns 20 this year. That's why we are having this conference. The MGC is as much a celebration of our long and rich history of trade, cultural and people-to-people exchanges, as it is a vehicle to advance modern-day cooperation to bring progress and prosperity to our people. So we see that integration and collaboration among the member countries of Mekong Ganga cooperation is kind of they are cardinal for successfully driving the project and reaping the tangible benefits out of it. Enduring development and sustainability can be gained through cooperative and very active gestures based on dialogue, which can be achieved only through people-to-people cooperation and stimulating mutual urge to focus on the aspects that unite the regions. So what we see here is that India's Look East policy, which was initiated in the early 1990s, is an important dimension of the country's foreign policy. It reflected a strategic shift in India's vision of the world and foreign policy orientation towards Southeast Asia. During this time, we saw that India faced economic and financial crisis, and this kind of coincided with the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was then India's valued economic and strategic ally. The world was no longer divided into Cold War blocs. So these developments, in fact, it compelled India to take a fresh look at its foreign policy. So the former Prime Minister, late P.V. Narasimha Rao, he quickly grabs the changing economic and strategic paradigms of a new world order and took a conscious decision to plug into the dynamic Southeast Asia, which is like an immensely resourceful and flourishing region. So the Look East policy, as it was earlier called, though from 2014 we have a very proactive Act East policy, it seeks to establish closer political relations with the ASEAN countries, evolving strategic links with individual countries, and develop strong economic ties with the region. So it kind of manifests India's strategy to carve a place in the region. Another interesting dimension of the policy was to showcase India's economic potential for investments and trade. So India abstained from both policy and actions exhibiting any hegemonic ambition, thereby making itself more benign towards ASEAN countries and creating the desired ambience for I would say for better regional cooperation. So in the beginning of the new millennium, when the idea of building physical connectivity with Southeast Asia, it kind of gained momentum, India embarked on the second phase of its Look East policy with a much broader agenda involving security, cooperation, transport and connectivity, infrastructure development, and various other areas of cooperation. So the phase 2 kind of reflects, which brings in the strategic importance of India's Northeast region. And here we see that when we talk about the Act East policy, our Prime Minister has time and again kind of focused that Northeast region of India is kind of the central, I would say that the fulcrum of the India's Act East policy. So it is also kind of envisaged that the Northeast region will definitely benefit, and it is benefiting from India's economic relations with Southeast Asia in economic development and also kind of reduction of say conflict because it's an insurgency prone area. So the broad components and outcomes of India's Look East policy, they were further discussed into political relations, which I won't go into much detail. I'm just giving a brief background. And political relations, strategic engagements, and economic cooperation. So when we talked about it, we bring in the aspect of connectivity. So here, when I say that Mekong Ganga cooperation, people-to-people linkages, we are talking about a very, I would say, important aspect of connectivity, people-to-people linkages. We, in fact, the 3 C's, commerce, culture, connectivity, in that it's not just about culture, which was much discussed in detail in the previous panel yesterday too, about the economic linkages and everything, but also about human-to-human connection, about people-to-people. So we see here that the connectivity of the northeastern states of India with Southeast Asia. So Myanmar is one of, it's the only Southeast Asian country which is sharing its borders with India, and Myanmar being a part of the Mekong Ganga Corporation, the Mekong country, so it sees itself how significant the first linkages of the northeastern states of India is with the Mekong Ganga countries. So we see that both the Mekong countries and the Northeast India, they're surrounded by powerful economies, and they have the potential to play a role in further strengthening the larger aspect of India-ASEAN integration. So therefore, like development initiatives, which we see for Northeast India and the Mekong are critical in enhancing India-ASEAN connectivity. So in this perspective, strategies to connect India with Southeast Asia, they need to explore new routes that pass through India's strategic location of the Northeast India, and not just, I would say, physical or roadways, but also the sea routes and the corridors. So here I bring in the example of the Mekong India Economic Corridor and also the land routes like the Trilateral Highway. So it has all the potential to become a commercial hub and also an international tourist destination, which can itself serve as a very strong booster for people-to-people linkages. So we see that with better connectivity, it is in fact needed to sustain the accelerated growth in relations between India and the ASEAN countries, as well as narrowing down more into India and the Mekong countries. We see that the Trilateral Highway, which is like a project from Moreh in India to Mysore in Thailand, although progress is much slower, but there has been a further improvement in it, and we hope that parts of it will be in a functional state of, I would say, the highway in kind of more in a functional capacity. But this highway itself, there is proposal to further extend it to Lao PDR and further reaching to Cambodia and Vietnam. So it kind of brings in all the linkages when we are talking about the Mekong India Economic Corridor and the Trilateral Highway. And it is in fact very much needed when this integrated transport system comes in, because when we are talking about people movement, when we are talking about people-to-people linkages, connectivity remains a key issue. And there has been a lot of policy debates and studies on the issue, but it is suggested that an integrated regional transport network will in fact yield further movement of people, and it will benefit not just economic benefits and increase trade flows and expand markets across the region, but it will kind of expand the scope of, I would say, learning and understanding about each other's culture, each other's practices, and also further kind of trying to accommodate and explore the potential of strengthening the ties between India and the Mekong countries. And when we are talking about Mekong Ganga cooperation and the people-to-people linkages, we can, in fact, we cannot ignore the fact that it is much to the that the Mekong sub-region, it has a strategic significance. It is located kind of at the junction of active, expansive markets of Asia. So the cultural and religious diversity of the Mekong sub-region in Southeast Asia is indeed very remarkable. So we have a lot of ethnic groups. And when we are talking about ethnic groups of the Mekong sub-region, there are a lot of linkages, or we can trace back the historical and civilizational linkages between the ethnic ethnic groups of Northeast India and the ethnic groups of the Mekong countries. So the Mekong, it still kind of forms an integral part of each of the distinct culture, and they all kind of rely upon its waters mainly to travel and trade. So the diversity of cultures and traditions is legendary, and in that India itself, we do not lag behind. So Indian culture, religions and political ideas, they play a considerable role in the political, I would say, cultural landscape of the Mekong sub-region. So moreover, the cultural influence, it flowed both ways, and Southeast Asia has also contributed in enriching India's culture and traditions. So not just about the cultural cooperation, which we talk about, but we see in aspects of people-to-people linkages, we can talk about education, we can talk about religion, we can talk about medical tourism. So all this further, we need to explore more and not just confine ourselves to the traditional aspects of cooperation, but further widen it with looking into more aspects of these newer areas of cooperation like health tourism and many more aspects like the chair has already discussed and mentioned about the role of the youth and the youth summit. So in fact, just to cite my own experience, India Foundation in collaboration with Ministry of External Affairs and with the ASEAN Secretariat, we had already organized two India-ASEAN Youth Summits. The first, as mentioned by Preeti ma'am, was held in Bhopal, and the second we had in Guwahati. Why we took it to Guwahati was bringing in the entire concept of making Northeast India as a linkage, as a fulcrum of India's Act East policy. This year we were planning to have it too, but we couldn't have it in the physical platform. But we did have ASEAN India Youth Dialogue on a virtual network, and we received quite immense positive response, not just from the Mekong countries, but all of the 10 ASEAN countries. So these are very small steps, I would say, but in fact it does contribute in further understanding and I would say learning more about each other's culture, each other's, be it politics, be it economy, or be it about different policies and the future of the complete regional architecture as we talk about. So the youth and they are the future leaders. So we need to focus on such initiatives more, but also further expand the scope of potential between people-to-people linkages. Like I said, mainly health tourism, religion, and we need to focus more on that and also further enhance the movement of people by easier physical connectivity part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shristi Pukhrem. I think you've really traced the entire history of the evolution of India's Look East, which became Act East policy, particularly with the specific focus on the Mekong Ganga, the Mekong region. The initiatives that Government of India has taken, particularly with special focus on tourism, education, and culture, I think those are very important. I think you've given some very important suggestions on improving connectivity, something that previous panelists have also spoken about. Again, youth is a very important stress. Religion, you mentioned. Health tourism, certainly. And now in the wake of the COVID, again, I think the importance of health tourism becomes even more important and a huge potential for learning from each other, not just in terms of immediate treatment, but also, wellness tourism, which is another aspect, given the popularity of yoga and other Ayurvedic and other traditional systems of medicines, which are prevalent both in India and in the Mekong region. I think your emphasis on the Northeast was perhaps the most important, where of late, recently, there have been important developments, but we could do better. Again, on the youth, interaction amongst youth, we have the youth summits were important aspects. I can tell you during the India-ASEAN's commemorative summit that was held in 2018, there was a lot of youth-centered activities. And we did have very good and active participation from all of the Mekong region. I think for the first time, we did what is called a band festival, where we had young, bands, music bands coming into India, traveling all over, or Ramayan for that matter. Those are yet other very important elements that propagate and encourage people-to-people contact. So those are important takeaways for me from your presentation. Last but not the least, we have Dr. Rajiv Ranjan Chaturvedi, former visiting fellow of RIS. So since RIS is one of the co-hosts of this seminar, be happy to hear from Dr. Chaturvedi. So you have the floor, Dr. Chaturvedi.
Thank you, Chair Ambassador Preeti Saran. I want to express my sincere thanks to ICWA and RIS for giving me this opportunity to share my understanding of people-to-people relation. For last 2 days, we are hearing very rich presentations by panelists and a brilliant presentation by my co-panelist. So that will, I want to make a point here that I will be repeating some of the points which have been already made, which is reiterating the vital issues which are important between these two regions and for MGC. What I plan to do in next couple of minutes is to highlight why the MGC matters for India and what can be done to make this relationship more meaningful. The Mekong sub-region has a strategic significance and economic weight. It is located at the junction of active, expansive market of Asia. The cultural and religious diversity of the Mekong sub-region in Southeast Asia is remarkable, as has been highlighted in previous sessions. The two rivers, Ganga and Mekong, not only nurture life, but provides a unique platform for cooperation and rejuvenating old ties for deeper integration. This cross-pollination of ideas and the spiritual interaction between them has left an indelible mark on the religion, regional art, architecture, culture, language, and people-to-people exchange, stimulated by a spirit of creativity, cooperation, and collaboration. Ideas are equally important as military and economic power in today's international relations. So we need to work on that. When we see the diversity and we talk about ideas, Indian culture, religions, and political ideas played a considerable role in the politico-cultural landscape of Mekong sub-region. The influence of ancient India remains alive in place and personal names, commonly used words, and in the arts and crafts. Buddhism is still the dominant religion across Myanmar to Vietnam, while Hinduism survives in pockets such as Bali. There are visible signs of the strong impact of Indic civilization on the region. The Buddhist and Hindu religion, the epics Mahabharata and Ramayana, the Sanskrit language, scripts, temple architecture, and so on. The cultural and civilizational imprints of India influenced the emergence of statehood and interstate systems in Southeast Asia. Studies show that the countries in this region adapted and modified a whole range of foreign ideas and rules to suit their interests and local context. This process of adaptation preserved and in some cases amplified local beliefs and practices while producing a significant but evolutionary historical changes in domestic, political, and interstate relations. The Indian cultural influence, therefore, was an adaptation and not an acceptance in complete sense. Moreover, Southeast Asians gave as much as they learned from foreign cultures and civilizations. The cultural influence flowed both ways, and Southeast Asia has also contributed to enriching India's culture and traditions. Despite the rich civilizational linkages, the cultural connectedness and communication between India and Mekong sub-region are very limited. We are living in an interconnected world in the age of diffused culture based on modern outlook that relies on science and rationality to address emerging challenges. While we celebrate our past, we also witness modifications and adaptations and infusion of new elements in our relationship. In today's world, culture and ideas are the key in framing and shaping prevailing international norms. I also want to underline here that India's spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the world is a family, has afforded a certain innate cosmopolitan outlook and comfort in dealing with diverse cultures and people. Its embrace of pluralism is deeply rooted, almost instinctive, and this is an asset in an increasingly globalized world. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam philosophy is reiterated always by policymakers in India and people so that every individual may behave with everyone living anywhere in the world in the same manner as one would with their own family. From the very beginning, Hinduism has consciously tried to provide a space for different forms of religious expression. The last hymn of the Rig Veda, the oldest and most sacred Hindu text, explicitly states, "Come together, speak together, let our minds be of one accord." Just like all the ancient gods come together around the sacrifice fire, the place is common, common the assembly, common the mind. So let our varied thoughts come together. Thus, global welfare, constructive attitude, cooperative relations, and familial etiquette are the main ideas on which India's relations with the world are conceived. With this backdrop, it is also important to acknowledge some important elements of people-to-people connect. People-to-people cooperation is subject to numerous internal and external political, economic, and social impact factors. While external dimensions include bilateral relations to geopolitical churnings, internal factors are shaped by issues such as local innovations and enterprise, decentralized administrative structures, openness to new contacts, cooperation and partnership, existing intellectual potentials, knowledge of foreign language, and so on. Further, the forms of cooperation differ according to the type of cooperation, institutional framework, capabilities and capacities functioning in different policy areas, and with the actors involved in supporting such cooperation. The most common areas of such cooperation are regional development, economic development, transport and trade, environmental protection, culture and sports, healthcare, tourism, innovation and technology, education, and communication. Cultural cooperation embraces all kinds of collaboration and offers a basis for contacts and interaction. Indeed, it provides a strong foundation to build resilient links and cooperation between partner countries and regions. The objective of people-to-people link is the development of cooperative forms, procedures, and instruments that facilitate the elimination of barriers. Further, people-to-people cooperation can include the transfer of best practices, experience, and new knowledge, which can contribute to eliminating administrative barriers, thus generating a more competitive business environment. It can be used to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the public administration responsible for regulatory regime, and therefore contributes to simpler and shorter administrative procedures for businesses. More importantly, people-to-people cooperation promotes integration and connections between regions, cities, and institutions, which provide the basis for targeted communication and cooperation and helps reduce the lack of knowledge about neighboring countries. It promotes the exchange and transfer of knowledge and contributes to resolving everyday problems at the local and regional level. Nevertheless, such cooperation does also features barriers and disadvantages. People-to-people incentives and forms of cooperation often do not have appropriate institutional conditions in place. Partners countries face a range of administrative asymmetries, linguistic barriers, and lack of financial and human resources. These disadvantages can lead to disappointment and can even outweigh the advantage. Therefore, the key question is, how do we connect people effectively? Some of the challenges and potentials were highlighted by previous speakers. And also there was reference of the Mekong Ganga Cooperation Plan of Action, which lists 11 priority sectors to further deepen and enhance cooperation. Among them, it is important to highlight some areas which could result in greater visibility and impact. First, cultural cooperation seems a starting point for this relationship. This conference also started with session started with cultural cooperation, talking more about that. We also heard a lot about cultural cooperation, and Nalanda University reference came from several speakers. They talked about establishing common archival resource center at Nalanda University, which is an important, and many aspects of cultures has already been highlighted. Sustainable management of resources, cultural resources is utmost important, and therefore India and the Mekong countries need to amplify their cooperation in the field of cultural resource management. It is directly related to the management of economic development, tourism, preservation, and commodification. Culture and cultural resources represent a vital asset in efforts to develop tourism across Southeast Asia. Tourism in the Mekong region is highly dependent on cultural attractions, and proper management strategies would ensure that cultural assets could be preserved and also contribute significantly to the material well-being as well as the stability of the societies. Mekong region and India could work together to share their best practices in the area of cultural resource management. Technological and professional cooperation could enhance understanding and improve sustainable CRM. Some of these are already happening, which needs to be further enhanced. Intercultural communication is another vital issue. Since the beginning of civilization, when the first human formed tribal groups, intercultural contact occurred whenever people from one tribe encountered others and discovered that they were different. These ideas of cultural differences have long been recognized, but in the absence of accompanying cultural knowledge, this recognition most often elicited the human propensity to respond malevolently to those differences. Everyone is quick to blame the alien. This penchant to blame the aliens is still a powerful element in today's social and political rhetoric. For example, it is very common to hear charges that immigrants are responsible for all of the perceived social and economic problems affecting a society. Furthermore, culture is a dynamic thing and it changes with time and circumstances. Cultural groups faces continuous challenge from such powerful forces as environmental upheavals, pandemics, wars, migration, influx of immigrants, and the growth of new technologies. As a result, culture changes and evolves. More importantly, due to a lack of intercultural communication, knowledge remains limited. Intercultural communication is vital to develop a better understanding of each other, practices, and sensitivities, likes and dislikes, and thus it could be very helpful in boosting mutual interaction. The third important issue under the cultural aspect is dealing with the cultural space. Both Southeast Asia and India have experienced an explosion of popular culture. Products such as movies, pop music, animations, comics, television programs, and fashion magazines that have expanded and deepened their reach, not only domestically but also across national and even regional borders. Today, there is no one dominant stream of products originating from any single location, but a variety of commodities, images, and fashions that simultaneously derive from multiple centers. This multi-directional flow of popular culture have intensified to reach consumers in different national and linguistic areas and have substantially decentralized the region's popular culture market. As a result, consumers are exposed to various popular cultures to a great extent and are characterized by a diversity of consumption habits and lifestyles. The production and distribution of this flow, however, is very unpredictable. The massive production and consumption of popular culture have had a major impact on the way government perceives commodified culture. Cultural policies represent ways for governments to emphasize and reinforce nation building or prevent the infiltration of foreign cultures either on moral or political grounds. In the name of defending the best interest of civil society and deterring encroachment from undesirable outside forces that may threaten their nation's cultural life, governments have resorted to censorship. Moreover, to promote culture, governments take various other measures such as building museums and monuments, establishing folklore studies, promoting national sports, or designing national schools curriculums. The success of such cultural industries has generated a major shift in official thinking. Indeed, there is a realization among governments that cultural industries are a great source for enhancing countries' soft power and have the potential of cultivating lucrative export enterprise. Indeed, culture is linked to both the developmental idea of amassing national wealth and enhancing the national image by promoting the export of national cultural products. As a result, government-led discourse of cultural policy, culture, and cultural products throughout the region have acquired both economic and political value. The extent.
Dr. Chaturvedi, could you kindly conclude because we're running out of time? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Give me 5 more minutes, ma'am. Yeah, thank you.
Could you condense it into?
Okay, sure. I'll try.
Yes.
So how the cultural industries of the Mekong region and India collaborate will depend much on government policies and support. It required greater coordination and a structured approach. The second, tourism is another priority sector under the action plan. Already other co-panelists have highlighted about religious and health tourism. These are two particular areas where India requires enhanced momentum. Promotional of civilizational connect is an important feature of the Indian government. Further, as I discussed earlier, Hinduism is a framework that follows for coexistence of an extraordinary variety of ideas, beliefs, and ways of life. The tradition of long oceanic voyages is still remembered in Odisha in folklore and festivals. The festival of Karthik Purnima takes place in mid-November when the wind shifts and begins to blow from the north. This marks the time of a year that ancient mariners would have set sail for Indonesia. Families, especially women and children, gather at the edge of water body and places paper boats with oil lamps in the water. The maritime links to Karthik Purnima are remembered in many other ways. A fair held every year in Karthik called Bali Yatra, which means journey to Bali. These little traditions are vital in keeping alive our genetic diversity and cultural traditions. So the point I wanted to make that we need to focus on little traditions and to revive that. Third point, education, already important aspects have been highlighted. What I want to highlight here is that women and girls represent over half of the Mekong sub-region population, and therefore India needs to provide adequate attention and facilitate a bigger role for women leadership. The inclusion and leadership of women could be a game-changing in the field of education. Institutions like ICWA and ASEAN India Center can play an instrumental role in enhancing people-to-people connect. For example, providing short-term visiting fellowship to or distinguished fellowship to people from Mekong sub-region. Fourth point I want to make is there is a need for
concluding point.
This is my last point.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
There is a need for greater cooperation among law enforcement agencies in detecting and mitigating arms, drugs, and human trafficking in the region. It is very, very important because these are very challenging issues which has been already highlighted by several co-panelists. And because there are some other areas which I wanted to highlight, like microcredit, fintech, weather forecasting, agrotech, where India can extend its support. For example, launching satellite, similar like India launched for South Asia, India can help Mekong region launching satellite to help in these sectors dedicated to Mekong sub-region. We need a very robust cooperation to deal with all these issues. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chaturvedi. I mean, I know that you said that at the risk of repeating yourself, it merits reiteration. But I think you've come out with some very important new ideas as well in the framework of, I think you explained the India's perception on the collaboration with Mekong. In any case, generally globally with the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as an important component. I think all of the people-to-people contacts are subject to political, social, and economic factors is a very important element in your presentation. Of course, I think you, like the other speakers, did point out towards the disappointment that sometimes tends to outweigh the advantages, something that previous panelists had also mentioned, and that you did outline the proper management strategies that we should evolve. And I think you yourself have suggested some very important ones. I think for me, the foremost was the one where you talked about inclusion of women. I think that is something that has huge importance for India, for the entire Mekong region. The Mekong region in particular, I think, has some of the most dynamic women in my experience that I have interacted in each of the countries. You know, the women entrepreneurs, women who are responsible for preservation, protection, promotion of culture, cultural values, I think are very important in people-to-people contacts. So I think that was a very, very important point that you spoke about. Again, the importance of the role played by law enforcement agencies is another very important point. You know, we are in the last minute of our interaction, and there are no time for any questions. I noticed from the chat box that there have been a few comments made. There was a specific question that was addressed to, I think,
Dr. Vannarith, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Xuan Vinh, and then one for Dr. Chheang Vannarith as well. I don't think we have time to respond to any of these. I think there is some comments that are already self-explanatory, but maybe Prabir, you'll have to organize a second session.
Right.
On the questions and answer session. I have to thank the panelists. I think you've come out with some extremely brilliant ideas, your in-depth knowledge and the information that you've shared, very valuable. I think your very candid, very frank presentation of your frustrations and where we can move forward were, I think, the most important takeaways. I hope you will reflect it adequately in your written presentation, which will be published for posterity. I hand over the floor to you for whatever else you might wish to say. We've reached 1 o'clock in the end of our session here.
Thank you, ma'am, and an excellent chairing, excellent presentations, and I congratulate all of you. So useful and so interesting, And we could not answer to the questions because of the time scarcity. From my side, one small request to all the panelists: please revise your papers and give it to us. Rest information we will send you through email, because we have to publish, as the chairperson, ma'am, rightly said, at DG ICWA here, we have to bring out a book, by this year. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining the session. Dr. Tanjan, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you to all the panelists. I think it was a very good session in which we covered a lot of ground, and a lot of suggestions were, put across by all of the speakers and the panelists. So all credit to the chair and to the panelists. And we would break here for about 1 hour. So a request from our IT people, as we'll be breaking. So we request the panelists for the next session to kindly log out and log in 30 minutes prior to the start of the fifth session, which is 2 p.m. India Standard Time. With this, thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.